We'll segue to what is arguably not our least by any means, but certainly our last conversation of the entire week. We bow humbly in the general direction across the pond to our pal Tom Weiss of Deductive. I'll let him explain his new title and where he is now domiciled, to, I guess, put a nice capstone, or I'd like to say an exclamation point on maybe this week's worth of conversations. And Tom, you may not have heard my comment earlier when we opened up this morning, but sadly, I called it a debate, and I'm not sure, given what transpired in the U.S. on Tuesday, the word debate is the appropriate title for this conversation. But let's call it a conversation, a kinder, gentler discussion, shall we say, about just measurement generally. I mean, there's so many different data points and opportunities and things that we've never had the ability to use or put to market before. But I love this conversation, the foundation of it. What are the best things? Is it one or the other? Is it a nirvana that we're never going to get to? Are there ingredients in a bigger recipe? All that kind of stuff. Have at it in hopefully a very spirited, but shall we say, polite conversation about this topic. So I thank you very much, Tom, and all of you for joining us and putting yourselves at risk for the next 40 minutes or so. I appreciate it. And Tom, please feel free to talk with your microphone on. Wink, wink.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, they don't call me a technologist for no reason. So thank you very much for that. You may say last and might be least. I always think that the Rolling Stones were always the last people to play at a festival. So I consider ourselves to be the Rolling Stones of this week's discussion on audience measurement. And we have an amazing panel for you. We are going to argue with each other. We are going to tell it the way it is and hopefully stimulate a little bit of conversation. I've been looking in the Q&A and the chat. I see the word respectfully is being used in the chat. So please can I ask, if you want to use the chat, please can you use that to be rude about the panelists? Yeah. And if anyone's sufficiently rude about it, we might take notice of that. Yeah. If you've got a direct question, please go at it in the Q&A. Yeah, and if it's interesting enough, then we'll pick it up and we'll ask everyone on the panel. Yeah, and if we put a question in the Q&A and we don't answer it, it's not because we didn't notice it, it's because we don't think it's a good question. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists. So we have, I always go through Zoom in the order that it appears on the screen, so that's just how I'm going to do it. So we've got Kimberly Gilberti from Nielsen. As with every other panel, I think most people here have either worked for Nielsen or currently work for Nielsen, which kind of does represent really the breadth of Nielsen in this space, but more of that later. Kimberly actually leads the advanced TV initiatives at Nielsen. She's the SVP of product management there. And so her work there includes integrating set-top box and ACR data, which is going to be an important part of the topic that we're wanting to talk about. Next up, we have David, who is the chief strategist at TrueOptic. So they power a streaming media advertising ecosystem. He joined there about 6 years ago. And previously he was at Nielsen. We're looking forward a lot to your input, David. Perhaps you could say some nice things about the company you used to work for. That would be a delightful thing. Then we have Raghu. Raghu is the chief product officer and he's one of the co-founders at Alphonso. Okay, so they partner with a whole bunch of smart TV OEMs, mobile apps, etc., to get a whole lot of information about what people are consuming in real time, using that for targeting. So he has, I think he started off as a computer scientist, then unfortunately he got an MBA from Wharton, and he now lives in the Bay Area with his wife and 2 boys, I believe. We have the last person who isn't me. We have Alejandro. I don't know if I pronounced your name correctly or incorrectly, but feel free to mispronounce my name. Everyone always does. Who's MIT grad and a former McKinsey consultant. He's produced TV shows, but now he spends all of his time using data and machine learning to help make content decisions. And I think that we're going to have a lot of really interesting things that come up from there. Last but not last, and probably least, I'm Tom Weiss. I have We worked a lot with Inkscape. To date, we were the Dativa, then we were Deductive, and just 2 weeks ago, we were bought by MarketCast. So although I wear a Deductive hoodie, I am now the chief data scientist at MarketCast, and we provide services to programming groups and Hollywood studios around research and analytics. That's what we do. Okay. Yeah, so people are already saying, so great shout out in the Zoom chat, but you're meant to be rude about us. It's not great to see so many Nielsen folks. We want you to say terrible to see so many Nielsen folks. Where are the independent people? But the reality is, the reason that so many people are around Nielsen is because Nielsen has led the way in currency for so long on TV. Yeah, their projections of actual people watching TV across the country is what powers the whole TV advertising industry. However, OTT has driven mass fragmentation of our viewing. Yeah? The ability to measure viewing is no longer just the purview of Nielsen, and some people would say that actually, with the blind spots, it's less relevant now than it was previously. So, I mean, I guess the opening question, which Kimberly, I'm really going to have to put at you, is, are panels still relevant today?
Sure. So thank you for all the Nielsen love, I guess I'll say, sort of, kind of. But certainly, Nielsen is known, obviously, for its rich history in measuring television and certainly measurement via the panels. The panels are absolutely still relevant. There's no question in our mind that they still are, but they evolved to serve a somewhat of a different purpose than they have traditionally. So as a starting point, the purpose of a panel is to be representative. It's to be inclusive of all types of audiences, and it's recruited in a way that we can be sure we're representing every type of person, whether it's age, gender, ethnicity, geography, income, as well as the method in which they are exposed to television. So that could be over the air, it could be cable, it could be satellite, it can be streaming only. We measure every type of home, and that's really going to give you the most holistic view of really what a television audience is. So it's really designed to eliminate bias, and that's a huge part of what good measurement is all about, is making sure that there isn't bias. Having said that, it also has come to serve a bit of a different purpose in addition to that, which is really to serve as a calibration point to big data. So, Nielsen has spent a lot of time working with big data, whether it's ACR or set-top box or digital census data, et cetera. And every data set in many ways has its own challenges that you have to overcome in order to make it usable for measurement. So really what our panels do is they serve as a truth set from which we can make adjustments and calibration to actually get to measurement that we believe is as accurate as it possibly can be and continues to be representative. So it really is striking that balance between making sure we can measure every type of household in the US, but also being able to calibrate and adjust big data to make it as good as it can be for measurement purposes.
David?
I disagree to some extent. I'll say something nice about Nielsen, I promise I would. So if I kind of rephrase the question, Tom, a little bit to just be, are panels relevant in sort of a digital streaming environment? And I think most people feel that TV will ultimately become dominated by that. And to that, I'd kind of say not really. And the reason I would say that is a couple of things. So, measurement's really about, like taking action in the environment within which you're operating. And, the digital architecture of streaming really allows for one-to-one sort of impression level, real-time decisioning. And so you need a measurement system that sort of can provide that to take full advantage of the capabilities of digital. And as we all probably remember from our stats courses, right, the sample size you need to sort of make decisions is inversely proportional to the size of the thing you're measuring. So the smaller it is that the thing that you're trying to measure, the bigger the sample that you need. And ultimately, ideally, you would want kind of census level, right? Because if you're going to make decisions at the household level, you want all the households. And so, I would suggest that, that a census-based system is, and these exist today, True Optic, that's what we do for OTT, is the sort of not perhaps essential, but certainly the best way to provide measurement in a streaming environment, because you can activate on that data. And in fact, our identity stack we use the same identity stack, I should say, for both measurement and targeting. So in an environment where you're constantly kind of, looking at the information you're getting back, being able to make decisions off of that, put it back into your campaign management system or plan, the ability to have that kind of, massive data set flowing in a real-time environment, because I think where all this is going. So, in that respect, as measurement data and activation data kind of become a little bit more one and the same as you're operating in a digital environment, which enables impression-based one-to-one decisioning in real time. You need a gigantic data set. And I think, to the extent that census level data is available, as I say it is today, not everybody's using it, at least for OTT, that I would, think that's really where we want to go. I would agree with Kimberly for sure, in the sense that with linear TV and even, addressable linear, to the extent that you have gaps in set-top box data coverage and ACR coverage, or they're sort of samples themselves in some cases with ACR, you need something to calibrate them against, and that's where a panel remains relevant, I do believe. But on the streaming side, I would kind of put out a bit of a disagreement as far as long term where that's going to go.
Kimberly, do you think Nielsen's going to have a panel in 20 years' time?
So I do. I actually do. And I think, again, it all comes down to how it's used and calibration. And having a truth set to work from. And also, the other key piece of census data is it doesn't naturally come with information about who is actually being exposed, right? So a lot of the insights and the signals we get from the panel also help us determine who is actually in front of the glass. It helps us do things like co-viewing. So one impression you might get from a census feed does not necessarily imply that there's only one person in the audience. So it is more of, I'll say, a better together sort of scenario as opposed to one versus the other. I totally agree with David that when it comes to very granular viewing, when it comes to streaming, certainly having census data is super important. And then, as David also pointed out, many data sets that sometimes get mixed up with census really aren't. So filling in the gaps, calibration, understanding who's behind the glass, and really being able to correct for data sets that were not inherently designed for measurement but can still be used for that purpose responsibly with the right adjustments is really where I see panels going. I don't think they'll ever go away, to be honest. It's just they'll be used differently.
That's really interesting. One thing about the calibration thing, is that something that Nielsen actually licenses the data? So, if someone like, Raghu says, I've got my census level ACR data, can he then license Nielsen data to try and calibrate his panel and make it naturally representative? Or is it, or do you only calibrate your own data?
So it isn't so much that we calibrate our own data. We have data partners that we work with, and we are essentially adjusting that data. We don't at this point sort of return it back, if you will, with adjustments applied to it at this point in time.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got our first question, and our first question is actually, we like this question. It's almost a plant because it's the next question on my list that we've all asked. So it's about, one of the interesting things is that, David, if panels are going to die, why have you got new entrants starting panels? So the question was really about, I said the word viewing, and someone said, well, TVision are the only people who actually really measure viewing. They said Nielsen doesn't measure viewing, it just measures if someone's in the room. And I think that's a good point, TVision, they're definitely out there pushing a new panel. We've heard announcements from Personicor, who are out there launching a new panel. So, David, if this stuff is all dying a death, why are people launching these new panels? And is TVision necessary?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I think if we're talking about sort of classical campaign measurement, impressions, reach, frequency, demographic or other audience profiling, I would sort of stand by the fact that, census level data mixed with, big consumer data is ultimately where things will go. But when you try to get a level deeper and try to get into things like co-viewing, who's in the room, attention, which has become a big topic, is getting a lot of attention, so to speak, then you're talking about, how do you collect that data in a way that it's both the best data you can get. So I would argue that's sort of a behavioral passive type measurement, and then do it in an economically, feasible way. And that's where the rub comes, right? So either you can try to get information about who's in the room and what they're viewing using, sort of like next day survey type stuff, or other sort of, older tools that might give you a larger sample, but are probably laden with other issues, or you can sort of move towards a sort of new technology that Personic Core and TVision and others, as you've described, are leveraging, and really get that sort of natural behavioral passive measurement. And again, the challenge with that is the devices that do that, at least today, are very expensive. And the people who are willing to have those devices installed in their home are not, it's not everybody. So in a case like that, where you have no census level option, I think you have to, you go for what you can get. But in cases where you do have census level options, which I would say is sort of that now available to, to replace or to substitute for what traditionally was, standard panel-based campaign measurement, then I think you will see those data sets take over. So the panel, these panels, TVision, Personic Core, means it's brand new technology. It's very kind of, whiz bang stuff. And I think take advantage of that, at least in the beginning, because of costs, the sample-based approach is the only way to do it. And so it's better to do that than to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater.
So David, you're admitting there is a place for panels after all, but just not in that growing area.
Right, panels of a different sort. Panels that measure new things in new ways. Yes.
Fabulous. Okay, so that's all we've got time for on the panel. So let's talk a little bit now about some of these more census-y type data sets. And I guess ACR, I mentioned it, Kimberly's done work on that. Raghu's obviously very involved in it. I've been very involved in it as well. It's kind of almost become ubiquitous, I think, actually, over the last few years. It's quite different. I remember when I started working up with ACR data, everyone said, well, look, this is really going to give us anything that looks like Nielsen data. Whereas now everyone's just saying, well, hey, I've got all this, and what am I going to do with it? So, a lot of aggressive licensing there, becoming very ubiquitous. Raghu, could you give us a bit of a thing? What does ACR give us that we don't get from panels?
Yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to interrupt both David and Kimberly in the middle of their conversation.
You should have done.
Like the debate the other day, right? But, resisted doing that. I think the big thing that ACR does compared to panel is obviously scale, right? And, I think 20 years back when everybody had a few channels to watch and, sort of prime time represented, you could take a few homes and represent everybody in the nation. Panels were really very, very accurate. But I think over time, that behavior has changed. There is a lot more diversity in viewing. So the scale really matters. And ACR data is orders of magnitude compared to any panel, right? So that really is the big difference. Second is sort of what David was saying, with fragmentation of viewership, you really need to get diversity, right? And again, ACR, all data sources are not the same. There are many single source ACR data sets, meaning they just represent let's say a single brand of TV. Those would probably have huge biases. So you have to really source data from multiple, TV brands to represent different cross-section of the society and things like that. And when you do that, that again, I think, makes it better in quality overall to represent what people are really watching. Because even in my own home, there are four of us and we each watch completely different things. It's not co-viewing at all anymore, except for maybe, sports on Sunday or something like that, right? So the more of these data, the TV sets or living room devices that you can get data from, the better it represents, the actual viewing behavior. And the last but not the least is ACR is probably the best source to get both linear TV and OTT data from one single source, which is very, very important, right? Because there's a whole transition both from advertisers as well as consumer side. Advertisers want to buy in both, OTT and linear TV. Consumers want to consume content from both sources. So in sense, you really want a source that can represent both of them really well and give you sort of a combined data set, if you will.
So one of the things that reminded me, so the new, I don't know when it came out in the US, but the new Enola Holmes movie has just come out on Netflix in the UK. And I said to my kids, hey, should we all get together as a family and watch it at the weekend? Yeah. And they all said, no, I've already watched it. What do you do? So would you be able to measure with ACR the consumption of that kind of exclusive Netflix content that isn't available elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, so I think with ACR, the nice thing is anything that is going to the glass, right? Whether it comes from OTT, it comes from your linear TV. I mean, it could come from any different sources, even, people playing video games, as long as you have that content already sort of pre-indexed, right? I always compare this to sort of Google. Google can bring up any web page as long as it's seen and indexed that web page prior to you searching for it, right? And as those algorithms improve, you can, fetch exactly what the user is asking for. In a similar way, as long as you have this content already indexed, anything can be, measured using ACR, because it's really sitting right between you and the sort of the streaming that's coming into the TV, right?
Cool. So there's no blind spots in terms of Netflix content or anything like that from your side when it comes to ACR?
Well, I mean, I think Netflix, there are business relationships that Netflix typically imposes, whether it's working with smart TV OEMs, where they'll say, we don't really want sort of our, audience data to go out. So it comes from, it really depends on the smart TVs where this technology is deployed, how, they're working with Nielsen, and I mean, with Netflix, whether that data gets out or not, but there's no technology barrier as such to measuring that.
God, is that your experience as well, Kimberly?
So for Netflix in particular, they do not actually allow, in general, ACR to run against their content. So the way ACR generally works is that as soon as someone launches Netflix, or in many cases, all smart TV apps or many apps, it depends on the manufacturer, the ACR itself will shut down. And that's really one of the challenges of ACR data, is it will look to the recipient of the data as if the television is off, when in reality they're actually tuning to over-the-top content or CTV content, whatever the case may be. So Netflix is a really good example of something that is challenging to measure through ACR data. We actually do it through the panel. That's a whole other story. But from an ACR point of view, I agree with Raghu that it provides scale, it provides granularity, but similarly, it has its challenges and its biases like anything else. Depending on what manufacturer of television you're talking about, they may be more likely to be the bedroom set versus the living room set. So there's going to be some portion of the household viewing that you're not going to be able to consume. And it's also much harder to know actually which sets come together actually to form a household if you have two of the same manufacturer or two manufacturers that you work with together in the same place. So again, ACR is great for lots of purposes, but it does have its challenges. It also matters, to Raghu's point, what is actually being monitored by the ACR. So what we find in general is that in many cases, not the full breadth of sources that people are consuming are actually being monitored by that process. And again, that will essentially create gaps in the overall measurement.
Yeah, I just give a shout out to SIM, Coalition for Innovative Media Measurement. I think many people listening or on the panel are aware that they're doing a big study that Howard Schemmel was moderating the last panel, I believe, and Gerard Broussard are kind of heading that kind of really interesting look at sort of combining set-top box and ACR data, for linear addressable measurement. And, they found some interesting things. They haven't really concluded what's behind some of these findings, but, some interesting sort of differences between ACR and STB in terms of kind of, coverage of ads in this case that, were known to be run. And they'll see there's a lot of variability in the ACR data compared to the STB. Could be an issue with, as Raghu was saying, that the commercials weren't necessarily in the library so that the system could recognize them. There's also issues as what was discussed earlier with kind of household coverage. And, so ACR data sets, I agree, are interesting and have a lot of advantages scale-wise over panel, but, have their own sets of issues in terms of, biases and coverage within the household as well as kind of across households. And the interoperability of those data sets is pretty famously, not great. So, I know that Alfonso has some other ways of getting those data sets combined, and, feel free to talk about that. But I just say that ACR data sometimes is served up as kind of like the silver bullet, and I would suggest that, it's not quite.
I think it's kind of like, talking about search engine technology, right? I mean, obviously there are many types of search engines and only one survived. And I see in ACR, it's a similar thing. I think people mistake deficiencies in one ACR system to represent sort of maybe in all. And obviously, if you compare how long panels have been around to how long ACR has been around, we are sort of in the first innings of how ACR data is getting used and how it's getting better. And how much you can improve that, I think, is really what is very promising, right? Because you have a data set that is far more superior than anything that has ever existed, set-top box data included. So I think that's the reason why people in the market, right? It's not just companies like us who are in the, who are the providers of this data, but the people who really are using this data, the marketers and the broadcasters, they really look at this data and say, wow, we've never seen anything like this before, right? We've never had this granularity, this sort of accuracy of the data. And so I think, to me, that's the exciting piece about ACR.
One of the things, right, you don't have to walk about it. And if there's someone else who you feel has got bad ACR, just go out and name them. We're recording it, so their lawyers might contact you later. Yeah, it'll be really entertaining. I've worked hands-on with Nielsen's granular annual data set, a lot of ACR data, a bunch of different set-top box data sets, and the one thing I would definitely say is they're all really complicated to work with. Yeah, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to measure something really complicated, and there's no way really about that. I mean, so one of the interesting things, if you look at set-top box data, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I mean, there certainly seems to be a difference that, to date, there's been, this ubiquity amongst smart TV data, yeah, but much less access to MVPD data. Is that something that people see changing? Do we think MVPDs are going to start to share more, or are they going to restrict more? Are there any trends that anyone's seeing at all there?
I don't think that trend is going to change much, right? I think the set-top box data, there are some issues that most people may not be aware of, right? So one is, it's sort of what you call the return path data, and a lot of set-top boxes are still quite old. So it's not, as reliable in some sense, or, timely to get that data. And then it only covers sort of linear TV viewing of shows. Doesn't cover ads. You typically do what's known as an ad overlay on top of it. So, you take ad logs or, some other airings information, and then you overlay on the viewership information. And as sort of television market changes, where there's more spot buying, there is more, addressable coming in, you really are kind of not getting the right picture when you do that process, right? So I think as there's more better quality data becoming available, I see less incentive for some of the set-top box companies who have held on this long to now suddenly open up and then sort of be compared against other data sources. So, I don't know if that will actually happen. I think 5-6 years back, when set-top box data was the most important data set that was there, we saw some companies jump in and take advantage of that. I don't see that trend continuing.
I've just got to quickly say, Kimberly, would you agree that 5 or 6 years ago, set-top box data was the most valuable data set there was?
So I don't know if I would necessarily say that per se, but look, at the end of the day, there's a place for both. We see a lot of value in set-top box data. We see a lot of value in ACR data. And as I said, they each have their own challenges that are unique to what they are. And as a measurement company, our job is to figure out how to work with those pieces together and make it the best that they can be. But set-top boxes have their pluses as well, right? You have, generally speaking, better PAI that can be used in third-party matches, right? Because someone is subscribing. You're not just buying a set at Best Buy and plugging it in and we know nothing about you. So that is helpful. You have a view of the household because you generally are going to have multiple boxes within the same home. It isn't reliant on the signature match. So it doesn't, you're going to get whatever hits the glass through the set-top box. Granted, that's completely true, but you're going to get whatever hits the glass. And that is in many ways more comprehensive, especially if you start talking about local market level, where it may just simply not be monitored by ACR. But on the flip side, it has its challenges too. So, if you think about the fact that your TV can be on, but your set-top box, or your set-top box can be on, but your TV is off, you have to have models to be able to account for that. These data sets were not necessarily all designed for measurement. So we evaluate any provider. We don't just take whatever data comes in the door. We evaluate every provider, whether it's set-top box, ACR, or otherwise, and we determine if it is fit for measurement, and we only integrate that which, sort of meets those criteria.
I would start with what Raghu said about the share, back to the sharing of MVPD data or set-top box data, I think, putting two things together as linear TV becomes more addressable and more like digital, I think the pressure from agencies and brands from the buy side to be able to take advantage of that and be able to sort of manage that by using the data that is coming in through those boxes will ratchet up. And to some degree, the value of that data ratchets up, but the value of the inventory, and make those cable companies own whatever, 2, 3, 4 minutes an hour, to fully leverage that in sort of an addressable environment, they're going to need to open up the tent a little bit as far as viewing inside of that measurement data, so that the people with the money, the brands and the agencies, are going to be more comfortable spending that higher CPM to buy that inventory. They're going to want some proof that it works. And so I think there's going to be some market forces that will coalesce to sort of push more visibility and availability of MVPD data.
I think that's absolutely right. I think one of the things I've been observing this year is, the fantastic reception that Vizio Ads has had, yeah, and I think that's partly because there's so much data available on that platform, yeah, that people feel so much more comfortable about it. And it'd be interesting to see whether the MVPDs do follow suit and release more data to support.
I think if some of the MVPDs adopt, a slightly different technology, right? Even within a set-top box, it doesn't have to operate the way it currently does, where you have this lags and you really don't have a digital identifier. It's sort of mapped later on using a household address to an IP address kind of mapping. You can easily change that with sort of the technology that's available. There is no reason why smart TVs have better OS than a set-top box, right? So the minute you bring some of that technology, I think then you'll get much better data, which will more be in line with where the market is heading. And I think that might be the way for some of these companies to leverage their data set.
I totally agree with that. And the only thing I would just say, and we kind of interrupted, and we'd love for that to happen. But as you know, and I'm a cable subscriber still. I haven't cut the cord quite yet, and my set-top box is probably vintage 1999. I mean, the rollout of these new technologies takes so long. So that while 5G and some of the, back end CDN type improvements with ATSC 3.0 and all that stuff coming out are available just about now. I think until we see that technology in place at the majority of pay TV households, it's going to be a while.
I think that's absolutely right. So we're getting a pattern here that we think, we like this census data you can get from set-top box. We like what you get from smart TV. We think we need some panels for calibration and filling in some of the bits that we can't see. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to try and finish on first-party OTT data, but there's another whole gap in the stuff that we can't measure. A lot of that is, first of all, it gaps that where we just don't have information because someone like Netflix has just shut it down. Yeah. But also, it's not normally talked about very much at conferences, but a lot of people don't pay for TV. They watch TV and they don't pay for it. Yeah. And there is a lot of other viewership. So, I mean, so what can we do to try and get, Alejandro, what can we do to kind of get some insight on, what people's behaviors are? I'm going to avoid saying the word viewing, because every time I get said the word viewing, I get heckled by someone saying, no, we're not talking about viewing. We're just talking about other things. And I do agree with that point. So what are the other data sets we can look at really to get
Tom, and that's a really good point what you're making in terms of instead of looking at viewing, looking at behavior. And if you think about that, and I guess David was talking about this, a lot of people are paying attention to attention. So really, at the end of the day, it's how do we quantify attention? So if you start from that premise, I think then you're pretty much more open to kind of then exploring the consumer from more from the perspective of the consumer journey. And that consumer journey, if I like a TV show, in my case, and I think most of the people who are here, probably starts. If I hear about I don't know, Stranger Things, maybe I do a Google search to see what it is, right? And that search probably leads me to go and watch a trailer. Maybe that leads me to go and read an article on Wikipedia or a blog, or maybe that leads me into some links where I can actually watch a like even an episode of the show and using this like like peer-to-peer networks. Which when you're thinking about volume, I mean the interesting thing about this is like these are activities that when you combine like the people who are doing this, we're talking about a universe of 2 billion people globally, right? So 2 billion people globally do some sort of activity related to content. So that's getting really like to the point of like getting to the census, right? So, and we're measuring like everybody from a perspective of like how they interact with content, tracking that consumer journey, right? That starts with a search and maybe includes a lot of like different like touch points. And by collecting all that, and really this is our premise, is like we believe that by collecting all that, then we have like a lot of signals that are very valuable to actually understand what's popular and what's not. And with that premise, then like essentially, if you put in like your behavioral economics lens, we can essentially model the market, right? So on one hand, we have like supply of content with, as I guess the discussion was saying like, oh, we need to index all of this content that is coming out so that is valuable. And that's part of the problem that we have solved, because like, if you think about it, it's like almost an endless supply of content. And that's like a big portion of that. So if you measure the supply, so then you have that. And then if you have all of these signals that are coming from the consumer, now all of a sudden you have also like a signal of demand. So now you have a way to methodically really try to answer questions that clients may have that go beyond like, just selling advertising. It may be things like, oh, you know what, like I'm launching this show, like I want to know like if I should spend a lot of money or a little money. Or maybe something's like, oh, you know what, I'm thinking about acquiring this show to my, my catalog. Does it make sense? Should I have it in the US? Should I have it in Europe? So like, there's a lot, basically all of a sudden now you have like the universe of questions that you can answer are much more broader, but now you have like the framework to actually go about solving this. And that's what we're really doing. So, and that's what I think it's like, our perspective is more holistic in that way. We're looking from a perspective of like what the consumer really wants and how the consumer really interacts with all of these TV shows across, platforms. It could be a TV show that is on Netflix, but it could be a TV show that is on a linear TV channel. So really like that sets it's almost like the perfect environment to test hypotheses. And we kind of like, that's kind of how we operate. We have a hypothesis, we test it out. Now we have the data to do it and we can do it quickly. So that's our perspective. And that's why we think, it's interesting, all of this like discussion about like, what is the right metric or what is the right way to understand audiences? All of that is valuable. And our perspective is more like, yeah, look, it's like, we're platform agnostic. We want to get as many signals as we can. The more signals we have, probably like the better models we're going to be able to make or build. And that's really our approach, right? So it's all about like combining all of these signals into something that then you can actually use to make predictions on like really valuable things. Because then you get closer to like, how do you make money based on all of these signals? Because you have a deeper understanding of the consumer. Especially now that if we go back to the initial thesis, like attention is getting a lot of attention because it's really hard to get people's attention. Like each of us only have 24 hours a day. That's what we have. But there's like the supply of content that we get bombarded every day. It's almost limitless, right? So like on one hand, like supply is almost limitless. On the other hand, like the demand, you have like a limit. It's 24 hours a day. That's all we have. So that's why I think it's important to capture as many signals as possible, so that at the end of the day, we can get you into an environment that we can answer questions that people have.
That is absolutely fabulous. Thank you very much. Now, so one of the difference I think between this panel and the Rolling Stones, is when the Rolling Stones get to the stage where the lights are meant to be going off, all they do is they start playing I Can't Get No Satisfaction or Paint It Black, and there's no way anybody is going to have the guts to stop that conversation. But I can see our esteemed leader Tim Hanlon has come here. So, I think I would like to thank all of our panelists for what I hope has been a fabulous session. It's very difficult to know without feedback. I'm very glad to see that, we have answered some questions. We've had some heckling in the chat. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. And Tim, thank you very much for inviting us.
I appreciate it very much. This is very spirited and I think a tremendous capstone. And I appreciate all of you for being willing to be spirited on our last session of this week. And I want to thank not only you, but everybody who's been part of the mix over this week. And of course, our sponsors, without whom any of this would be possible. And again, just my overall thanks to all of the participants, as well as the people who have attended. Again, all of this stuff will be available on the website on demand. Today's sessions by the end of today. All the other sessions are available now. And if you just couldn't be without more content, we have got the Streaming TV Summit's final day as well later this afternoon. Feel free to join us for that as well. And again, my thanks. I just can't thank you enough for not only participating, but for joining us. And we'll see you soon, hopefully in person and truly sooner rather than later. Thank you very much. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Good job.
Thank you all. Bye.